Hello and welcome to the football show. It's myself, Shane Stapleton, with Declan Bogue as always, and John Evans, former Tipperary, Roscommon and Wicklow manager. How are you doing, gents?
Not too bad at all, Sean. Or Shane, sorry.
Good stuff. And Declan, good stuff.
How are you, Declan?
Hi, John. How you keeping?
We'll
very good.
We'll jump on to the main game of the weekend. I'm sure we all saw it. I was down in Thurles to see Dublin and Kerry draw 4-9 to 118. Bit of a Goalfest, very entertaining, more entertaining than any hurling match we've seen, and down in a hurling field. John, what were your thoughts on the match? Do you see it as Kerry looking very exposed at the back in the first half, or do you think, wow, the way they came back and won the second half by 6 points, they've shown mettle?
Well, I'll tell you, Peter Kane, we'll put it like this, both Donegal and Kerry, the both green and gold teams, I think will be very, very happy with their day. Both came from 7 and 8 points down. That's the one thing. Donegal did it without Murphy. Kerry did it against the All-Ireland champions. Both managers will be very pleased with that aspect. However, there is a however, like you just said, Shane. They'll certainly have to work extremely hard to get their defence in shape. As for Kerry, certainly I would have to say that 3, maybe even 4 of the backs weren't aware of where the danger was, and that's frightening. That's a bit worrying now. However, their attacking prowess, for instance, Paul Murphy and Gavin White were extremely attack-minded and put in huge shifts. And I think it's the attack-mindedness of Kerry that really brought him back into it. And with Donegal not shifting away from it, God, that both teams kicked some fantastic scores, 19 and 20 scores. That's brilliant for their second game back, to get team camaraderie up, to get and you could see both teams, both green and gold teams, they enjoyed it, Shane. They really enjoyed their comeback. A lot of work to do though.
And towards the end of the first half, Kerry were disallowed a goal. I mean, the advantage rule is a little bit of a mystery, I think, to most of us, very frustrating. And on the back of that, rather than Kerry being able to equalise, they knocked over a free, and Dublin hit 1-1 through Paddy Small and Conor O'Callaghan. Then at the start of the half, Kerry didn't touch the ball. They didn't hold possession for about 4 minutes. There was a small bit of an injury break.
I'd be more worried about Kerry giving away the ball, be quite honest with you. I thought they gave away the ball very, very easily at times. They went into the kicking mode when it wasn't on. But by God, when they did come back, Shane, I think they hit 5 on the trot. And the exhilaration, you could see that they were feeding off of this. And I think it's easy to go on the negatives, but I think on the positive side that the whole team seemed to get more out of it, stay in the game, coming back, claw back. And by God, I'll tell you something, they were looking at Kerry in the eye. Now, all right, maybe the goal, maybe the penalty at the end, which was well deserved by Kerry, put a gloss on it a small bit.
Declan, what were your thoughts on the game yesterday?
I just wonder, and John could actually, I'm interested to hear his view on it. You've got Paul Mannion, he's opted out. You've got Jack McCaffrey, he's opted out. Michael Dara McCauley is retired. Paddy Andrews is gone. Bernard Brogan is gone now a couple of years. And I'm just wondering, John, you know yourself when you go to gather up on a Tuesday night and you assess all the bodies and you see all the injuries. But if you have, right now, do Dublin have as strong a panel as they have had over the last 3-4 years? Definitely not. Does that then diminish the quality that's happening on the training field? Probably. How do they handle that? Are they, are we kind of clutching straws looking for a bit of weakness here in this Dublin panel? Or was the strength always in the panel? It's just not maybe there as it used to be.
Well, Ryan Howard, who would get on any team, Johnny Cooper, Colin Baskell, who was a very, very underrated player, and Sean Bugler, who started the game last year. They are still there, and of course you have Dean Rock, that's, I presume, out injured at the moment. I see what you're saying. Does it take from the training ground? Does it take from the psychological confidence of the team? I would agree it does, but they've done so much in transition. I mean, it was a shock to see McCaffrey go, and an even bigger shock then by Mannion to go. So at the end of the day, they're still there. They're still there. I think there's too many people trying to get on that team to have it be a negative for the training field, certainly.
And what about in terms of the overall football and sort of strategy-wise? Is that, having seen the last 2 weekends, is that the end of maybe a small bit of tinkering from Peter Keane that just went wrong in that monsoon? Like, and it can't be forgotten that game against Cork last year was in such heavy weather conditions. But have we seen the end of that idea if we're going to maybe pick our battles with something later down the road?
Jeepers, on the contrary, I'd be very give a damn what division I was in. If I had conceded 4 goals and a possible 5, I'd be very worried about my defence. And whatever about tinkering with things, the Kerry football way is to go forward. That's clear and distinct, and it sort of it ignites the team. However, I'd be looking at the midfield area where Diarmuid O'Connor excelled there yesterday and certainly claimed the place. The midfield back, that's where the problems are. That's where, and again, look, they're a wonderful team going forward, but I think they have to start to worry. If you have a team that's a half forward line and the midfield partnership that has no problem working hard, then you can solve those problems. But you do need to get them to travel the field.
There was a couple of selections that I found a little bit odd. Paul Ganey playing wing forward. I mean, his best football for Kerry to me has always been on the inside line, but maybe there's an embarrassment of Rich's inside, so it's probably a little bit difficult to kind of marry all of those brilliant forwards into the one team. The other one then, it wasn't that unusual, it was just Paul Murphy ended up full back a couple of times. He's such a brilliant player going forward, but just before Con O'Callaghan out-muscled him for that goal, I said to the journalist beside me, look, there's danger coming here, and lo and behold, Dublin won the ball and ended up getting the goal. I wonder, David Moore, in games like this, with the mobility of Dublin, does he struggle in the way that maybe like Aidan O'Shea does, but he'd be brilliant against other teams? Like, do you see any issues like that in the Kerry team?
Of course I do, and this is where I think you've got to have one of those midfielders at least, if you don't want to tinker too much with the forwards, is that he has to be certainly a really, really mobile defensive player that can drop to centre back and maybe your centre back drop, because look, in any code, whether it is basketball or whether it is rugby now with the kick, crossfield kick, if you get a mismatch, you good players see it. And on 2 occasions they put in 2 high balls. Con O'Callaghan won both, and the result was 2 goals. So look, who did it last? Oh yeah, was it Tyrone, if my memory is right? They got Paul Gallivan back in and they dropped in a ball that led to Peter Canavan sticking the ball in the net and winning the All-Ireland, if my memory is right. Playing together, and they can see the mismatch.
And Tom O'Sullivan has to come back into the
Kerry
back.
are pretty good at that. Kerry, they don't even need to. They did that, I suppose, in the 2014 All-Ireland final too, and they dropped the ball into Paul Ganey, who has been marked by Paddy McGrath. You recall, and he had about 4 inches on him.
I remember it exactly, and it's something that Dublin have been playing together for so long that now they've been playing together for so long they can easily spot these things. And so when you got Con O'Callaghan and Paul Murphy, and the space was there, as you said, Shane, danger. You don't need. If in fact there was so much space around Con O'Callaghan, it's something that I think one of the midfield partnership or something has to rely on that, because I certainly wouldn't take from there's so many talented forwards in Kerry at the moment, because you have Tony Brosnan to come back and put his hand up. Stephen O'Brien, great to see him back, and look what he can do. There's so many guys that can come into this team, and you had, what's his name, Adrian Spillane and young Burns there. They're all good ball players. We're fine, but I think we need a defensive midfielder that's really going to work really hard, physical, and can drop in to cover players.
And do you think you have that? Do you think you have that in your ranks, or is that why, for example, Peter Keane got savaged for putting in Brian O'Beughley and Ronan Buckley in the half forward line last year, because he felt that we actually don't have that?
That's the $64,000 question. I suppose. Do we have it? We have good backs. If you remember at the start of the program, I said to you that we have 2 or 3 backs that are not seeing the danger. Now, the reason I'm saying they're not seeing the danger is that when the opposition and Dublin, who are masters at it, at creating space, we're not going after them, because to me there was another 2 goal opportunities there as well. And I had what's his name, Paddy Small, seeing Callahan on the right hand side, and they came in from the right hand side. Was it Howard came in from the right hand side later as well? We're just not helping each other defensively, and I think that will come. That is something that can be sorted on the training field.
Declan, it seemed to me that after 40 minutes, or when Dublin had gone 3-7 to 9 points ahead, that Kerry decided we're going to throw caution to the wind and press higher and more aggressively up the field. Because before that, when Dublin came up the field, they seemed to be able to hand pass to each other very far up the field without being under massive pressure by a Kerry defender, and they seem to just throw that all out the window and go, just a bit more Gengen pressing or heavy metal pressing or whatever way Liverpool are talking about these days. Can a team do that for 70 minutes? Like, can you start out that way?
Exactly, that's the point. That is the point there, that I was going to throw that over to John a bit. If you look at Dublin, you can keep that work rate up for a certain length of time, but over 70, really what our game's now, 80 minutes, like that is a lot of work. Like last night we would have seen on League Sunday where Eamon Fitzmaurice would have pointed out where there was almost 4, possibly 5 men around 2 Dublin players trying to create that little triangle to get themselves out of trouble. But I can remember Tyrone in 2018 up in Omagh doing the same thing, like when they got a really good thing going in the Super 8s, the first year of the Super 8s, and they made a big long, a short burst in Omagh and the hype. But the problem with that is always it's just the length of time that it's taken to do it, energy that you're expending doing that. Dublin are pretty good at it, but they're more about shepherding men down alleyways and blind corners, and turning them back then that they need to recycle. Whereas Kerry were just, when you commit that amount of people and then there's a kick pass on, then you can get really badly exposed. It takes so much work, it takes so much out of the players to do it.
Yeah, and I you're really on the ball there, because I looked at the bottom of my screen on the 2 or 3 previous, when they pressed Evan Comerford and pressed him hard on his scouts. That was actually a big turning point for Kerry. They got 2 or 3 scores, and Dublin got caught coming out of defence on 3 occasions in almost in succession. But you're perfectly right. At the bottom of the screen, if from the camera viewpoint, is that here were 4 and 5 Kerry players taken out with 1 pass. So it's a highly dangerous, and when you cannot work it's going over a long time, because you're running up and down the field now, not laterally. You've got to get players back. You can really get exposed in it.
John, how difficult is it to, you've coached teams at inter-county at club level, how difficult is it to coach patience on the ball from players? Because, Dublin are the masters of having the ball at one wing and swinging it the whole way around until eventually they can get someone bursting through a gap. Whereas, some players who aren't used to doing that and aren't as well, versed in it, they might run down blind alleyways, get themselves bottled up. How difficult is it to develop that?
Hugely difficult, because most guys, if they're in Croke Park in a big game, big game, they're treating the ball like a hot potato. They've made the pan pass before they've made the kick, the right move with it, and it's about being composed. My son was watching the game with me yesterday, and while I didn't answer him, I was concentrating on the game. I heard him saying on 4 or 5 occasions, why didn't they take the score? Why didn't Dublin take the score? And they moved it in, moved it out. God, they get to the high percentage. And then, as he said at the end, he answered it himself by he said, you wait until they got into a higher percentage position to take the score. You know, that takes huge time, huge hours on the training field, huge getting to know who the guy is with the left leg, the right leg, what the timing of the run is, and that takes a lot of time. We'll put it like that.
Yeah, Declan, I'm not sure if you spotted this, but Tom Lahiff had a banana shot from about 35 yards early on in the first half, went wide. He had a few more opportunities that thought he was going to wind up, and he didn't take it. So like that feeds into John's point. Whereas if you look at Michael Langan bursting into the top corner from the 21 and Peter Hart doing it from just outside the 14 as well, like Dublin just do not even take those scores on. Yet the supposedly defensive teams up north, they are actually now letting loose with those chances.
But Dublin's style has always been death and class. For however long they've been successful in this run, like they were probably a little bit more flamboyant in 2013 and probably 2011 as well. But like since that defeat to Donegal, I think Jim Gavin went away and did like a black box review and that, and said, right, what can we do and how can we guarantee victory in every game we play? And that I think he stripped it back, and they became the most kind of, I hate to use this word, but the most scientific team in the game in terms of what they were willing to chance and at what point. Peter Hart hitting the look, I mean that's what we kind of turn up for, is the Peter Hart skills and that. But I'm sure that we're saying that, but if Paul Mannion was on the field, like Paul Mannion was liable to try something different. When Dermot Connolly was on the field, Dermot Connolly would try the outside of the boot. He tried to take a sideline to win an All-Ireland, like, and that it didn't make it, and he got a huge amount of grief at the time. But as the players have rolled into the system, then there's been less need for them to come and bring something different. Instead, the system's already in place, and you either fit into it or you don't. And maybe in some ways, like, even though Jack McCaffrey won All Irelands for Dublin by bursting forward and getting a goal, maybe he wouldn't be just quite as encouraged to do the same thing anymore. And maybe the like of Mannion too, his natural game was being curbed because Paul, you weren't meant to take that shot from 5 yards inside the sideline. Maybe you could work it into, and perhaps that feeds into their decision to opt out for a time. Because, look, it's brilliant when you're winning and all the rest, but at the same time, an awful lot of footballers are still there for their own self-expression.
Is that something you find, John?
Yeah, it's a brilliant point by him. The thing about it is that, I suppose, if you take a bit of yourself out of the game, if you take away your own identity, particularly in the finishing side of things, you're taking away a bit of enjoyment, I suppose, a bit of saying wow, taking away the wow factor. And they're into percentages. That's what they're good at. That's what they do. So I would agree wholeheartedly in what you're saying. But do you become more of a machine of for the greater good of the system, rather than the character that you want to be yourself on the field? And I suppose when you have good finishers, the likes of O'Callaghan, the likes of Kilkenny, the likes of Paddy Small, I suppose, is shaping up to be one, and Costello, they have their system. It works, and it works very, very well. I suppose the other thing, before we go any further, there was a certain amount of people outside of Kerry who I was talking to last night after the game, and they seemed to hint that Dublin took their foot off the gas. I'm not asking the question now, but I don't know about that. I don't think Dublin do those things. I just think that that Comerford got pressed really, really hard and did have a few missed kicks, brought us into the game. We pressed them hard. it was time to do something different. And I think that maybe Kerry have one or two more things in their armoury that they will be able to use that are different to what they did yesterday.
I think Dublin might have taken their foot off the gas ever so slightly when they went 3-7 to 9 up. Because to me, they could have won by any score at that particular point. So obviously Kerry dug in and said, we're not going to take any more of this and we'll press up. And the flow of the game, I think Dublin had only 2 shots for the next more than 20 minutes. So they were very much pressed back in. And when the flow of a game goes against you, as you both know, been involved in football for so many years, it's very hard to sort of curb that, to stem that. So Dublin actually did pretty well to hang on, considering they were just being overwhelmed. So I'd say that will have laid down a marker both for Kerry to think, yes, we can compete with Dublin and aspire to beat them. But for Dublin, there's a bit of forewarned is forearmed, Declan.
Yeah, and I just could never understand why there was this kind of philosophy shift from that performance in the 2019 All-Ireland final, produced such a game and victory and so on, and then Kerry might go completely different. But I'm wondering, is there a slight trend in the teams that were to be breaking the sort of COVID restrictions on training? I'm talking and down and Dublin. There's been a slight underperformance in Dublin, whatever about their opening league. That was and I suppose if you look at the record, that's what the 4th time they've drawn in the last 8 games with Kerry, so it's probably not that. But I'm just wondering, is there any sort of a slippage there? Certainly with Down in Division 2, they're going very poorly in the last couple and then Monaghan, I know that they just didn't last the course the way they could have, and the first weekend they were quite poor, especially in the opening minutes against Armagh. Is there anything in that, Shane?
Possibly. I mean, maybe some team, I presume most trainings were colouring a little bit outside the lines when it comes to COVID restrictions and completely training individually. But I'd say any county that was caught, they completely down tools, and anyone who was training was just training on their own from that point on. So maybe that's a factor. John, do you feel that was a factor, that those teams that were caught breaking restrictions, that they probably lost the yard on other teams?
Yeah, I suppose I'd have to just look on the field there yesterday to see that what gives you the impetus. Kerry seemed to be the fitter team. Donegal seemed, and they relating back to what I've said already, they did put together an immense amount of scoring, immense amount of running. If we'll say the Dublin, the Downs and the Monaghan's, were they training, maybe they'd step back from it completely. Or the other answer is, are Dublin doing their serious training now? And that's why they kept a few of their players and brought them in. That may have come into play as well, I think,
Can I ask you about?
Look at Monaghan. They kept Conor McManus for the second half, and he pops in. If you're going to go all out to win the game, which they did, obviously, you want Conor McManus on the field, and here they held him. So maybe they're going through harder sessions now and trying to play their games to get themselves right for the championship.
Can I just ask you, John, about Dublin's attack, and specifically the hand pass to Conor Callaghan that allowed him then to get in along the end line? Is there any team, and I include Kerry in this, that use the sidelines and the end line, the dimensions of the pitch like Dublin do? Because, to me, it's all cuts, V-cuts as they call it in basketball, where you run to the player, you immediately then run away from the player, and you get that little hand pass over the top, and you see Conor Callaghan run the end line. All of a sudden then, I forget who his marker was, but he was out of position because you've opened the field up to the
Marley at the time, I think. Yeah, Marley.
Yes. So you've got all this space all of a sudden in a dangerous position, and all that Dublin are doing is just putting the ball into space, and the Dublin player is running into the space towards goal. Is there another? I know that we study these things and notice it about Dublin, but is there even another team that are doing that? I don't know. Have you noticed?
I think Tyrone did it when they were going well. I think Tyrone were very, very good at it. I think that Donegal, when the year they won the All Ireland, were good at it, very good at that. They did use the sidelines. They did use end to end, sideline to sideline, and I mean the amount of players they had on the whitewash, as we call it, was phenomenal, and it worked. There isn't as many teams doing it. Doing very few teams doing it now as much, but Dublin they've got very good at it. I think it's just that Dublin have so many athletic players that they're capable of doing it, and they're playing together that they're able to do it. Now I'd have to say this, that on both occasions when they came in from the left-hand side, our outside players were standing looking at it. It's easy point to finger, I suppose, and as I said already, that Morley and Murphy were caught cold, and they were caught cold. But at this level, it's the outside, the half forward and the midfielder coming back should be able to say, well, hey, we're going to force them out anyway. They're not going to cut our defence into shreds. So it's as much about the collective than as it is the individual. But it looked pretty awful, to be quite honest with you.
Sean O'Shea was very impressive as far as I was concerned, both hitting scores, creating assists, and also he won a couple of very important turnovers. What about the Cliffords though? Paddy Clifford, I think he kind of struggled at certain points of this game, whereas obviously David Clifford, probably for a while it didn't go his way, but he ended up being nigh on man of the match.
Yeah, I suppose David Clifford. Look, David Clifford had a very poor first 15 minutes. There's no question about that. If you're tightly marked and your inside guys are tightly marked, then it's very, very hard for the prowess. And this is, I know Paddy so well, having coached him and trained him, is that his top attribute is that he's able to pick out a guy 40 yards with a perfect ball. But at that stage during the game, we weren't firing inside. The Killian Spillane and David Clifford were not firing. We're getting the ball to David. Just things weren't going right. But I thought that was the tenacity of Dublin as much as anything else. But going back to Paddy Clifford, if you don't have your players getting loose and getting into position, there's no point in firing in the scuds. He didn't reel into carrying the ball, and he was dispossessed a couple of times. But so it's just, I think it's early days. I think that there's a few tweaks to be done, and I think the management will make those tweaks. I think there's a few guys that are going to contest positions, and at the same time, I think there's Paddy Clifford's first game against Dublin, so he's an artist in what he does with the delivery. He's a bit like Kilkenny in the early years. He was able to drop that ball perfectly inside to Brogan and these boys. So I certainly wouldn't write him off for anything like it.
There was some serious scoring done up in Division 1 North between Donegal and Monaghan, 120 to 411, and then Tyrone against Armagh, 215 to 210. Plenty of scoring there as well. And we touched on it already, but the quality of some of the goals, Declan. Conor McCarthy with 3 brilliant ones for Monaghan. Peter Hart blasting one in from 16 yards, and Michael Langan top corner as well. Brilliant stuff.
Yeah, and it's composure too. You see an awful lot more of this where, and again, I hate to say it was exactly about percentages, but Conor Callahan's goal where he took that extra solo to get past the goalkeeper, and Conor McCarthy's solo where he took it on past Sean Patton, like that, what that does, if you've got the close control to do it and the keeper buys it every time, it just leaves you with the open goal. It's a bit like the fist pass across the face of the goal for the palm in, like it's a 100%er. You don't see, players are less reluctant now to sort of go one-on-one and try and drill it down low or pat through the legs or anything like that. They tend to try and give themselves the very best chance. That's why a goal such as, say, Langan's or Peter Hart's comes out of the blue and get people very excited, because there's such an element of surprise to that. Now, Dara can, a lot of these things too have to take a quick thinking, and Hart's goal in particular caught Patton by surprise, because a lot of the time now you see someone who's 21 yards out and you just you imagine that they're just going to tap it over. You don't imagine they're going to put their full body weight through it. But my God, when Peter Hart decides to kick a football, like he absolutely kicks the leather off it. Like I'm just thinking back to that point, remember against Donegal in the Ulster final 2016, it was from about 50 metres where his whole body was
That's
off
right.
the ball. Like he can ping them, like yeah. But there's also, I think Ulster right now is do think that a lot of the teams are not showing their hand, and there's a lack of sweepers, and they're not really there full time. Like, and even when they're there for the kickouts, they're being marked up. And I think that they're all kind of just going out there and getting a feel for the season before they get their championship formations. Could be wrong, but like people were saying about Tyrone's quick kicking, getting the ball moving against Donegal, and a lot of balls sort of bounced over Richie Donnelly's head and other full forwards. But I don't think that's actually going to happen if the two were to meet in championship, because I just think that Donegal will sit into a defensive formation and such, or they'll have Hugh McFadden sitting in front of the full forward, whoever that might be, Conor McKenna or whoever. But right now, it's very entertaining. It's all helter-skelter. And Armagh are another side that have, so happy to see them on Saturday night. Like, they are really firing. Just tiny bit of bad luck and a lack of fresh legs to bring on because of the substitute row. But I look, it's all happening up north like at the moment.
It is, John. And like, do you take too much out of those games? I know you saw some of the Ulster clashes over the weekend.
Well, I tell you, Shane, I had seen Conor McCarthy a good few times. I think with UCD, and he was taking full control, full responsibility. And I said, for a young lad, this guy, why isn't he doing it with Monaghan? And to see him yesterday, he seemed to have matured. And as Declan has pointed out, he seemed to show that beautiful composure. Composure is something that a player learns and acquires, and it takes a bit of time. And he seemed to have that, and my God, it was awesome to see him, change direction. In fact, I think was it his second goal, he swiveled past 3 defenders, and he's a low centre of gravity, and it was great to see a young player standing up, and of course, I think he was well served by the 2 wing backs for Monaghan, McInnesby and is it Connell? They're 2 swift moving players, and they're very creative. I do agree with what Declan is saying. I think we are seeing a small bit of shadow boxing at the moment with beautiful scores, fellas trying this, trying that and the other, and that's why I referred to what I said about maybe 20 minutes ago. I think that Kerry will have something else to offer, and I think there's a couple of more things that are going to come from the training field. Hopefully that will shore up the defence, and I think that so will Donegal, no doubt about it. And I think that's what you're referring to, Declan, that there is no way in the world that Donegal are going to let that happen.
Declan, did you get much of a hint from Fergal Logan and Brian Dooher after the game that this is how they're going to be pushing forward for the season? Is that where you're kind of suspecting that this isn't necessarily how they'll set up?
I think Tyrone are like, and I'm really interested to hear John's perspective on this, because you have been entrenched, right, and that's probably an unkind word, but they have been committing to the process of being a counter-attacking, and I refuse to say the word defensive at Tyrone, because they're a pure counter-attacking team over the last 5 years under Mickey Hart. From around 2015, they were purely counter-attacking, and they ran up some unbelievable scores, like I think 2-17 against Monaghan in the All-Ireland quarterfinals, 2-16 in an Ulster final. Like, when they decided to cut loose, they had 5 goals against Cavan in the semi-final replay. They could totally do it. So what you have is you had to pick the players for the system. So say with Tyrone had bodies back, and you had a Peter Hart back, you had Tiernan McCann back, Matthew Donnelly back, and you might force a turnover on your own half-back line. And there's almost like an unofficial flying column of Matty Donnelly, Peter Hart, Tiernan McCann, all these players, a lot of power, a lot of pace, all breaking forward in a wee clump, then to get the ball forward to Darren McCurry, then to do something or to finish off. Right now that they're doing something very different. They're picking defenders and they're picking forwards in the positions where they're meant to be. But there are there's a sort of a little bit of tinkering that has to go on with this, because the leg of Frank Burns and that are playing balls in but they're not quite sure where the game's at the moment. And then they changed the lineup considerably. They had Dara Canavan in, they had Conor McKenna in, and they had Kieran McGeeney in. And that was their full forward line as named in the team sheet, right? That full forward line didn't score anything. They didn't score anything. Paul Donaghy was named as number 10. He played inside. He scored 4 points. A couple of them were frees. But Canavan's influence on that game was actually, it was extreme. He didn't give the final pass to Peter Hart, but he gave he set the ball on to Conor McKenna, who gave the ball to Hart for his goal. He set up the Mark Bradley goal with a brilliant hand pass. He robbed the ball off the defender about 5 times. One of those tackles where he probably didn't even touch the defender. He just tipped it out of his hand. It was a real pickpocket job. And he was just sort of adding in wee bits and pieces around here. Anyone who thought that Dara Canavan was going to arrive as an inter-county player and start kicking 7 scores from play like his father in games was the sort of didn't really know what Dara Canavan was like as a player. He is very like his father in terms of his movement, his jink and the way he runs. All that is like him, but he's actually quite, I'm not saying he's a lot like different than him, but he's very, very unselfish. But I think they also, when you look at Conor McKenna, his influence in the game, it got smaller and smaller. And to be truthful, I couldn't quite believe that they were taking off other players ahead of Conor McKenna. And right now, they have a real identity crisis in midfield. They tried Brian Kennedy the first day there. He came off at half time. They tried Declan McClure there, and he came off as well there on Saturday night. They've got Frank Burns and one more. I think that has to be filled by... Matty Donnelly looked extremely comfortable on at home at 6. I honestly think that McKenna is the man there that they need in midfield. They need him on the ball. They need him facing the play, breaking onto it. He's also an unbelievably strong tackler. When you hear the tackles that he makes, in a ground without any fans, you can hear the suck that he produces. So they are possibly one of the most interesting teams to look at right now because they are in full wild experimental mode. I was wondering, John, did you see any of it? Do you think that they're liable to stay the course with this style or positional sense?
Well, if it's going to be anything with Brian Dooher, I'll tell you there'll be a high work rate there. That's for certain. I was shocked. I was shocked to see such a prolific forward, we'll call him, even though he's so young, is young McKenna, Conor McKenna, right back at the post on the small square, intercepting a ball yesterday. His tackle was superb. His timing was spot on. He was so athletic and helping the defence coming out. I was really, really impressed with him, as I was with Canavan. And I just couldn't put my finger on it yet as to what Tyrone are about yet, apart from the obvious, that their work rate was so high, that their full forward line wasn't scoring. And I was sort of scratching my head and I said, well, is this sort of anything goes or get on the field? And Tyrone, I know, don't do that. But here you had a couple of out-and-out forwards, and here they were back in defence, like you said, Declan. And I think they're in transition. That's a big word to say, but Tyrone have too many, good players to be in transition. That's all I'd say about it.
Well,
but
John,
the philosophy, the sort of the overall sense of them at the moment, John, is the transition is definitely there in attitude and everything else. When you look at Matthew Donnelly was the captain since Sean Kavanagh retired, and they made Paddy Hampshire the captain. They made Kieran McGeeney, who was the captain of the team that won the under-21s, he's the vice captain now. So it's almost like Logan and Dooher have looked at the under-21s and said, this is our core group now, augmented and supplemented or whatever by the veterans of the team, but these are the boys now. And maybe that was the idea of changing the captaincy, is to throw it on to them in the same way as Mickey Hart threw it on to, when he came in, he said to the Cormac McAnallans, Brian McGuigan's, Owen Mulligan's, "Yous are now my men," and the like of Chris Lawn and, well, I'm saying Peter Canavan, but you know what I mean? These guys will support you and mentor you, but you are the core now.
And that's a real positive step. I mean, because they won in All Ireland there in 2000, under 21, was it in 2016 or 17? Them boys are coming through now, and I think that's a hugely positive step, as did Peter Keane when he brought in a few of the younger lads, Shea and Clifford, and under the guidance of these senior players on the field, I think that they'll learn very, very fast. They know what it's about. They have success, and it's like McCurry yesterday. The point he kicked. We talk about Dublin doing their system. That not in the wildest dreams would they take that shot, but that's lovely flair and lovely and good football by Tyrone. So I wouldn't estimate it. Sorry for getting away from this at the moment, but I have to think of Owen Cleary yesterday for Clare. He kicked, I think there was 7 or 8 points. My God, when I think of Tyrone, I think of they giving everything for the jersey and the passion they have and the work rate that, as I pointed out, that these forwards have. But look, what Colm Collins has done to Clare is everybody saying that look, hey, they're achieving a lot more. But I'm telling you, they'll put a statue for Colm Collins up, but not for all the medals and trophies he's bringing to Clare. But by God, for the heart and the team that works, they give everything. And to see Owen Cleary after kicking a point yesterday, my God, you'd swear he just won the lotto, and that was his 6th or 7th point. I'm just saying, I'm taking that because when we talk about Tyrone, you talk about the collective, you talk about the spirit, and I think the new management, like you said, Declan, they're giving it everything, and you might wonder why I'm comparing that to Clare. But I tell you, Peter Kane, they'll go in as real underdogs in the first round of the championship, but I'd be sort of very worried for that Kerry team if they get up on their high horse against a working team. And a working team like Tyrone, I think that they'll be there at the business end of the Ulster Championship anyway.
John, I know we're going to have to let you go shortly. You can let us know there if you have to go now, or if you want to leave it, if you're okay for another minute or two.
I have another 5 minutes or so anyway.
Great stuff. I'm curious.
Collecting my sister off the play at the airport.
That's great stuff. I was going to ask you.
Sorry.
Yeah, John, I was going to ask you what are your thoughts on Donegal, because they beat Tyrone in the Ulster Championship last year. And then I'd imagine it would have rocked them to the core, losing to a very good Cavan side in the Ulster final. Do you think they can take further steps this year, or why do you think they've come up short in a couple of big games in the last couple of years?
I suppose, look, you spoke about Mannion and Jack McCaffrey leaving, and McNeilish left, didn't throw in his lot. I think this year Donegal have everybody. I think, from what I know of them, and what surprised me yesterday was they came from 8 points down, and the next thing, with Michael Murphy gone off the field, and Paddy McBrearty stood up with, was it 8 points, if my memory is right? Jesus, these guys, the bench coming back, they have a big, gangly, mobile team. And you, Declan, and I know as well as you, Shane, that this is not going to be the format for Donegal. But by God, I think the pain and the hurt that was in Kerry, and let me tell you, there was some hurt in Kerry when they were beaten by Cork, is still ingrained deep down in that Donegal team. And I would say there's going to be a huge kick in them. And I'm beginning to like Donegal more and more, and to see how they reacted yesterday. These are all fact-finding little bits of information that you see about a team. We've all said that for the last 2 years that it should be Donegal. They're going for 3 in a row, I believe, last year. Look, they've won. It's all within themselves. It's now between Bonner and to get his artillery right, get everybody on the field, and I think they're going to be a serious outfit. Who's to say that they may not make it to an All-Ireland final?
The only thing is,
I have great respect for them. Sorry.
Would you not be slightly worried Michael Murphy going off with that hamstring. I mean, just with the schedule that we have now, they're playing Armagh on Saturday night, and then thereafter, like the championships coming down the tracks in 2-3 weeks after that. I mean, a hamstring injury, which could normally take, correct me if I'm wrong, but 6 to 8 weeks before you're really back training in any real meaningful up to game speed sense. I mean, this and a lot of teams are seeing it. I mean, right across the board, like Armagh got 4 defenders injured. Everything's been sort of crammed back in the return to play. But Michael Murphy going off with a hamstring, if that's a tear, John, that is serious repercussions, because he may be able to play, but would he be able to kick a 50-yard free off the ground with a hamstring strain?
No, I agree with you, Declan. But look, we'll stay on the positive side that it is 5 to 6 weeks, and you can get a guy right, and he's a guy that's superb, keeps himself in superb shape. But what I'm looking at, the real guys that I'm looking at there is that you see McNeilish and Oisin Gallen and McBrearty. I know it's a league game, but they're just showing that bit of flair. That's what I'm looking at. I think that they're covering ground and they're working for each other. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm being deceived. Maybe there is that soft bottom to Donegal, and if I don't think it's going to wholly be. It's not going to all hinge on Murphy, and I think they'll give him plenty of time to get right. But Murphy inside in the full forward line, Jesus, I'll tell you, they're going to still take 2 good men to mark him, So, yeah, look, it's all to play for, but I would certainly see Donegal as being the team that have the wherewithal to get out of Ulster. You can say about Armagh. I think Armagh have improved, and maybe Kieran Donaghy has done something with their passing. They certainly look a bit slicker, and they certainly are taking good scores that they weren't doing. And I think McGeeney is going in the right direction. But I just think Armagh are a slow burner for me. Monaghan, they're there or thereabouts all the time. And Cavan, don't write them off. Are they going to be like Tipperary, a one-year wonder? I don't know. But at the moment, anyway, I would say that Donegal are the team for me that would more than likely stay the distance, and it isn't all about Murphy. I saw that yesterday clearly. I mean, when you do go down the 8 points, Murphy's not there. He's a big player. If he's anywhere right, I think that I just think that this Donegal team is coming right, and if McNeilish is somewhere right, he's a huge player, gifted player.
Just a final question before I let you go, John. Your former team, Roscommon, they lost to Galway, who had been on the end of a serious trounce against Kerry the week before, and now Roscommon, they were on the back of a defeat to Dublin as well, which I don't think anyone would criticise them about. But what are your thoughts on Roscommon heading into this season? Obviously, Anthony Cunningham has brought in Stephen Poacher as coach.
I'd be quite honest with you. Look, I like looking at Conor McCarthy with UCD. I was looking at Diarmuid Murtagh, and I had Diarmuid Murtagh for 2 or 3 years. I rate him as the best forward in Roscommon. I think he's working as hard. And Kieran Murtagh, you'd have Inda Smith. These guys, there's some tremendous Carl Craig, Donny Smith. All these guys there's some very good forwards. But just again, I think that the defence of that Roscommon are shoring up at the moment. They're letting themselves a bit open. Maybe Poacher is supposed to sort all those problems, but I think they're lacking. They've lost a few players defensively, and I think they have stepped back from where they were 2 or 3 years ago, certainly, and they made the last 8s and they didn't do that well. But defensively, they've got to marry they've got to shore up their defence. It's sort of a bit open, So, but they're a forward-thinking team. They have huge flair. They're a very positive team. and they're a relatively young team. You know, Cathal Craig, okay, may be in 1 or 2 years onto the 30, but they're the likes of Inda Smith and these guys. Look, they love attacking, and their midfield and defence seem to be. You know, we're all talking about these defences, but I think we're in for a bit of a surprise. We're going to enjoy our league football, and this is what I'll say: enjoy our league football, because as Declan has hinted at it very, very strongly, I think it's going to be a different ball game when we get to the championship.
Well, look, John, we really appreciate you joining us. Your thoughts, always great insights, and look, enjoy meeting your sister, and look, I'm sure we'll chat again soon.
Oh, it was lovely, lads. Nice talking to you too. It was great to have a cross section of north and south and middle of the road, Shane. So,
thanks very much.
You're wrong. There's no such thing as puke football in the north.
Brilliant stuff, John. All the best.
Good man, John.
Okay, good luck.
So, Declan, just to build on to that point and what he was saying about Roscommon, John Evans, always great stuff to talk to him. But your thoughts on, like, Galway having been annihilated last week? It was so important for him to actually get some sort of a result, no matter how it happened.
I know, and like, I didn't catch much of Galway's game, to be honest with you, but like, what, you know, the calling cards for me was just energy, like, and you're seeing that a lot is the teams that didn't start with, you know, you're talking about the start of a league, and you're talking about having to bring championship intensity, because it's the ball's flying about in May, and there's mistakes there to be made, and there's a high pace of the game. But to me, Galway just brought a high, you know, they just upped everything. And I think then that'll take you a long way too, because you're making, if you're up on everything and you're making mistakes, they tend to be on up the field a bit. Like, you know, it's not that you're, you know, boxed in or you're making mistakes in your own half and then you can be really badly punished. But it was important definitely for them to show that they're a bit more in them than the previous week.
Yeah, I think absolutely, because even just a response to the manager, because like Pádraig Joyce must have been just scratching his head going, what the hell is happening here? Because it's over a year. They hadn't won a game in competitive action since before the pandemic. And, you know, we talked last week about their average scoring in the game since, and they were being beaten by an average of, I think it was not far off 10 points, conceding about 25 points a game. So for them, that was very, very important. Can I just ask you a little bit more about the Tyrone-Armagh game that you were at? Like, we only kind of touched on it there, but a penalty miss for Stephen Campbell around the 50th minute, that would have put Armagh 4 up. And if they had to, do you think they were in a position to actually go on and see that game out? Did it get 4 ahead, or did you feel Tyrone had it in them to come back?
Kieran McGeeney makes a good point in the post-match interviews. He says if that had went in, it was 4 points. He says then you could play a different game. It's a very good point, because then you can afford to do a wee bit more holding the ball, killing the game. Now, this present Tyrone team, that might be easy to do, like if they had been sitting into a defensive formation, but this present Tyrone team are learning a different way to do. You know, they're pressing much higher, so maybe they would have went after them anyway. I just think that, I don't know if it would have made any difference or not. They scored them, when they missed that penalty, Tyrone outscored them 1-5 to 2 points. But that was as much like, you know, Armagh had to make 5 substitutions in the first half, and 4 of them were their full back line and a half back, wasn't it? I'm just checking here. Yeah, okay, so you had Ryan Kennedy corner back, James Morgan corner back, and Paddy Burns had to come on for Aidan Forker. That was all by the 33rd minute, and Conor Turbitt come on then for Greg McCabe. Paul Hughes came on for Jamar Hall, so that was a slight change of formation there too. So, like, I've kind of sympathy for Kieran McGeeney, because he's looking at all these players coming off injured. He's looking at his entire fullback coming off injured. And there's a lot of figuring out stuff to do, a lot of switching players and filling spots in the field, and trying to also at the same time alter your formation. And you're trying to then look at what they're doing, match them in some ways, pose them problems. There's an awful lot of thinking. And then you have 7 substitutes, but you have 5 windows to make that in. So they used their 5 windows, they only got 6 subs on, and he was feeling very frustrated by the end. When the 35 minutes were up in the second half, only 2 minutes went up on the board. Because, at the end of the day, there was no real stoppages in the game, but you have to add on 20 seconds per substitute. So that actually was worked out to the letter. But I mean, would another 20 seconds have made much of a difference, that result? I just feel that 4 points would have left Armagh in a good position, but at the same time, Tyrone outscored them by 6, in the remaining period. Would the game have taken on a different complexion? Maybe Tyrone might have even been more urgent to get at the ball than they even were. In any event, Tyrone had the luxury of putting on fresh legs. I'm just going to read out here. Like, Mark Bradley came on the 49th minute, so he came on a minute before the penalty, and he got a goal.
A beautiful finish too.
Yeah, exactly, and that was created by the hand pass by Derek Cunningham too. Liam Rafferty came on in the defence, and Michael McKernan came on in the defence. So they had runners, legs. Rory Brennan came on after halftime. Michael Cassidy, Niall Sludden, they had a fairly strong bench coming off. And they only made 6 subs in their 5 windows too. Brian Dooher said afterwards that it was a learning for them because they maybe they hadn't appreciated it, or they didn't think of it. It was one of the things that just get a tiny detail that they missed in that last substitute.
And I was looking at his quotes afterwards. He said, "We're under no illusions. We're no world beaters by any stretch of the imagination. We've plenty to work on. The heartening thing about it was they dug deep whenever they had to." Do you think he's playing it down a little bit? Like, if you're in Tyrone and you look at the quality player for player and the size profile, and knowing that, hoping that Cathal McShane will hit the ground running whenever he comes back, you can't feel that you're too far away.
Yeah, but, at the same time, when you sort of lift the bonnet a wee bit, there's so much experimenting going on there, and there's it's kind of obvious now that they are lacking something in midfield there, and I just worry about them up against Fenton and another. I worry about them even up against a Donegal midfield of Hugh McFadden and, say, Jason McGee or Owen McNeilis or whoever goes in beside him. It's not that, if the midfielders won X amount of kickouts and that gave them a platform to win the game. That's not, obviously, but that sector still has a big importance. There's an awful lot made of, like, the middle third, it being talked about in collective terms. But a midfielder is still a hugely influential position in the game. And now they've sort of had Frank Burns in there, and he gave away a penalty on the tackle for Ryan O'Neill. They've had Brian Kennedy in there. They've tried. They put Matty Donnelly in there to fill in. They put Conor McKenna in there for throw-ups, or the half-time throw-up, and so on. They're mixing and matching and toying about and trying to find a formula that works for them, and there's no harm in that. But by God, there's so much stuff that's being crammed in for them. It's very surprising just how much they're willing to tinker, and how much you have to kind of scratch the surface and see what they're at.
You mentioned Owen McNeilis there. He came on for 25 minutes. He's a player that, if Donegal were to win an All-Ireland this year, you'd imagine he'd be making a big impact because of just the quality of him, and even John Evans talked about him before we let him go. Actually, I wanted to ask you about another man up in the north. So Antrim had a 3-13 to 3-12 win over Sligo in Division 4 North. So, but there's one man who he continues to stand out, and he's a great story, and he's a man that when you did the This Is Our yearbook 10 years ago, he was a prominent figure. So do you just want to talk about Paddy Cunningham?
Yeah, Paddy didn't go a long time. I was just checking there the record books, and in 2006 he made his championship debut against Fermanagh. Like, that's 15 years ago, and Micheál McCann was playing in the same game. I'm not sure if that was Micheál's debut or not, but the two, when people talk about the sacrifice, and I remember the quote from a Kildare player whose name escapes me now, that was sitting out the year, I think it was Daniel Flynn, saying the juice is not worth the squeeze. It's not like that Micheál McCann and Paddy Cunningham have played 15 continuous years. Both of them have had a few seasons out when, for whatever reasons, like Micheál McCann is very busy in business. He's got a CrossFit company. Paddy is a teacher who's got a number of different other... He's got a lot going on. He's a busy man, and he's got a lot of link-ups with businesses and so on. But Paddy has and it's well documented in the book and so on. Like, Paddy is suffering from Crohn's disease, which is severely debilitating for most people to even live a normal existence day to day. It's quite a severe condition, and yet, like, Paddy has played for years and years with this, and just got treatments which wiped him out, and then he had to build himself up then in time for big games. It's a remarkable thing what he has done to be able to come back and play county football. And last year he was playing against Cavan, and Lenny Harbison took him off after, say, 50 minutes roughly. He was the best ball player in the Antrim team. Every time the ball went up to him, he was picking passes. He was coming out deep and picking passes in the inside line, and he was excellent. But I always felt with Paddy that his best use would be there because of his reliability from free kicks and his desire to take on pressure situations. Like, you saw it with his club all the time. Like, he did it in county finals with Lavjarg, and the last two league games he came on in the closing minutes against Louth and kicked a point from a free with the outside of the left boot that just curled in beautifully. This time it's from a tight angle, running away from goal with the instep with the left at Corrigan Park, which actually is, I'll tell you, it makes it even harder in Corrigan Park because the back of the goals, there's nothing there. There's a bit like there's a space where there's about 35 yards of sort of just empty grass. So, sometimes when you're aiming at a set of goals like that, there's nothing to actually pick out as a marker. It's harder. And yet he nailed it. And that's Antrim's first two games. Big, tight games, important games. And Paddy Cunningham has dragged them over the line in the two of them. And that comes about, it takes Paddy to completely subvert the ego and say, that's me, I'm a 20 minutes man now, and that's what I can bring to the team. And it takes Andy McGeeney then the maturity to, the negotiating skills to keep one of the best players that has played for Antrim over the last 20 years content in that role.
And maybe that's the thing that other teams are missing out on. Look at Dublin over the last 5 years when they were hitting their early to mid 30s and other panels. How many times do you see X has announced retirement at the age of 30 or whatever? Most 30-year-olds aren't really walking away from the game. If they've got that competitive spirit to be there for 10 years, they're probably going to have to be dragged out of it, or at least want to have one more burst to go again and go again. But a lot of players are announcing their retirement at the age of 30, whereas in Dublin, Dennis Bastick went until he was maybe 35, 36. Bernard Brogan kept going.
Yeah,
keep naming them. Michael Darragh Macaulay, they keep going.
That's because I believe that Jim Gavin had a policy of just not asking them to retire. Like, you'll remember in the closing chapters where he's talking to meeting up with Brian Cody, and they have the most extremely awkward coffee. No, in fact, the waitress came down and says, what do you want to order? And Brian Cody, according to his autobiography, Cody just says, nothing. So Jackie Turrell had nothing, and they sat down like in a cafe or at a hotel, and Jackie had said he was considering his future, and Cody just said there'll be changes. And that was enough then for Jackie Turrell to know, look, I'm not wanted about the place, and so he announced his retirement. But I think that Jim Gavin had a policy that he just didn't retire players. He just did not do it to them. He just let them come to their own natural. And players knew, like, if you're just Michael Darragh Macaulay only made the subs bench for the All-Ireland final last year. I could be wrong on that, but I think that's the way of it. Bernard Brogan spelled out to him really the lack of game time. He only got a substitute space for the replay against Kerry in 2019. He was nowhere near it before. He had played against Cavan in the last round of the league. Like, he got a few minutes there. Like, players know when they're just miles off it, and then they just retire. But I think Jim Gavin always wanted to keep boys about for that good attitude. And it's easy. How easy is it to be a member of the Dublin panel? And when your season, it's going to stretch into September, August, September, and there'll probably be an All-Ireland final at the end of it. It's not so easy when you're 34, 35, or what is Paddy now, 37, like heading out to Dunscilly to train. doing all that stuff over the winter they had to do over lockdown. Like I think it's an absolute credit to Paddy. I'm delighted for him, and delighted for anyone supporting on from. It's a great story.
And just before we finish up, I'll run through some of the other results. Meath beat Down 215 to 14 points. It's a heavy enough win. Mayo beat Westmeath 21 points to 212. Cork had a 212 to 10 points win over Laois. Clare saw off Kildare, which was surprising enough. I was a bit surprised about that because Kildare had won against Cork the week beforehand. Offaly beat Limerick, and Limerick actually took a point late on when they had a chance to maybe try and force a goal for a draw, but they were thinking more scoring difference, and Billy Lee referred to that afterwards. Tips off Wicklow. Now, I actually did want Cavan beat Longford by 6 points, but also in Division 3 North. Derry beat Fermanagh 5-13 to 9 points. So Rory Gallagher against his native county. How would you think he would have felt about that? Is it, like for some managers, when they're managing against their own, they're just a bit like, this is a project, I'm with my team now, and I'm completely emotionally disassociated from any of that?
No, Rory wouldn't even feel like that. I think from what I'm led to believe, he thoroughly enjoyed the win.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, thoroughly enjoyed the goals going in and enjoyed the win, and let's leave it at that. We'll just leave it at that. So I don't think that he would have shed too many tears over Fermanagh getting a trimming at the weekend.
Yeah. Okay, well that's it for the football show, brought to you by orgaretro.com. Use the promo code OurGame and you'll get 15% off. Thanks very much, Declan.
All right, Shane, thank you.